Life has a way of blindsiding us. One moment you're standing tall, dreams within your grasp, everything seems in control. The next moment, it's as if the ground beneath your feet is torn away. A loved one dies. A relationship shatters. An illness steals your strength. An unexpected loss leaves you breathless. In those moments, the world feels silent, and heaven feels far away. It's in these spaces of raw, aching emptiness that the story of Job meets us. It isn't a fairy tale. It's not a success story with an easy fix. It's a gut-wrenching journey of a man who lost everything: his family, his health, his friends, his dignity, and yet, somehow, through the ashes of his life, found a faith deeper and more real than most of us dare to imagine. Today, young adults are walking through seasons of Job-like suffering. It may not look like ancient Middle Eastern deserts and boils on the skin, but the pain is the same. Depression. Anxiety. Loneliness. The sting of betrayal. The silence of unanswered prayers. You ask, God, where are you? And sometimes, it feels like He's not answering. But Job's story isn't about silence. It's about a God who is closer than your pain, who dares to meet you in the furnace of your suffering, and reveals Himself in ways you never imagined. Job's story begins not in misery, but in triumph. Job 1 verse 1 says, "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." Job wasn't perfect, but he was a man after God's heart. He lived a life of integrity, honored God in his household, and was abundantly blessed. The Bible tells us he had 7 sons, 3 daughters, thousands of livestock, and many servants. He was the greatest of all the people of the East, Job 1 verse 3. Imagine being at the peak of your life, a good career, a supportive family, your spiritual life thriving, everything falling into place. That's where Job was. But unbeknownst to him, a spiritual battle was about to unfold that would challenge the very foundations of his faith. Job 1 verses 6 to 12 takes us behind the curtain of reality, into the heavenly realms. Here, we witness an uncomfortable conversation between God and Satan. "And the Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth?" Job 1 verse 8. Satan's reply is chilling. He doesn't deny Job's righteousness but challenges its authenticity. He suggests that Job loves God not for who God is, but for the blessings God has given him. Does Job fear God for no reason? But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Job 1 verses 9 to 11. This is the crux of the story. Do we love God for who He is, or for what He gives us? It's easy to lift our hands in worship when life is good. But what happens when the blessings are stripped away? Satan's challenge isn't just to Job, it's a question that echoes through time, confronting every believer. Is God still worthy when life falls apart? Job's collapse isn't gradual. It's swift. In one day, Job receives blow after blow. His oxen and donkeys are stolen. His servants are slaughtered. Fire falls from heaven, consuming his sheep. Raiders take his camels. A great wind collapses the house where his children are feasting, killing them all. In one agonizing day, Job loses his wealth, his workforce, and his 10 children. The emotional toll is unimaginable. The very core of his life is shattered. His reaction? Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. Job 1 verse 20. Job grieved. He didn't hide his pain. He didn't pretend it was fine. But in his brokenness, he fell to the ground and worshipped. He declared, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Job 1 verse 21. How can a person still bless God when life turns to dust? But Job's trials aren't over. Satan returns to the heavenly courtroom and proposes an even more brutal test. He says to God, "Stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." Job 2 verse 5. God allows Satan to strike Job's health, sparing only his life. Soon, Job is sitting in the ashes, covered in painful sores, scraping his skin with a piece of broken pottery. The physical agony compounds the emotional devastation. Even his wife, overwhelmed by the unbearable sight, says, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Job 2 verse 9. But Job's response is remarkable. "Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" Job 2 verse 10. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Soon, 3 friends arrive, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. At first, they do something wise, they sit with Job in silence for 7 days. They see his pain and realize words can't fix it. They simply are there. But then they open their mouths. One by one, they begin to accuse Job, using theology like a weapon. Their argument is simple: "Job, you must have sinned. God would never allow this suffering if you were innocent." This is where Job's real trial begins, not the loss of possessions or even his health, but the misunderstanding of others. The isolation. The false judgment. How often do we, as young adults, find ourselves in Job's shoes? We struggle, and people throw clichés at us. Just pray more. It must be God's plan. Maybe you have unconfessed sin. Instead of comfort, we get lectures. Instead of compassion, we get assumptions. But Job knows his heart. He knows this suffering isn't punishment for some secret sin. And so, Job begins to cry out, not just to his friends, but to God. Job's prayers are raw and unfiltered. He doesn't sugarcoat his emotions. He pours out his soul with brutal honesty. "Why did I not perish at birth, and die as I came from the womb?" Job 3 verse 11. "I loathe my life, I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are a breath." Job 7 verse 16. Job's words are dark. Depressive. He feels abandoned. Forgotten. He doesn't understand why God is silent. And yet, in his lament, Job shows us something powerful. God can handle your honesty. You don't need to fake it with God. You don't need to dress up your prayers with polite religious phrases. Bring him your pain, your confusion, your doubts. Job teaches us that wrestling with God is not rebellion, it's faith refusing to let go. As Job cries out, his friends double down on their flawed theology. Eliphaz accuses Job of secret sin. Bildad insists that Job's children must have sinned to deserve their death. Zophar arrogantly claims that Job is actually getting less than he deserves. Their theology is rigid, formulaic. For them, God is a vending machine, good behavior in, blessings out, sin in, punishment out. But life, as Job is experiencing, is not that simple. Young adults, be warned, there will be times when life won't make theological sense. Suffering won't always come with a reason you can see. And people will try to fit your pain into a box because it's easier than sitting with you in the unknown. But God is not confined to human formulas. His ways are deeper, and sometimes he calls us to trust him beyond our understanding. Amid his cries, Job expresses a desperate longing. "For he is not a man, as I am, that I might answer him, that we should come to trial together. There is no arbiter between us, who might lay his hand on us both." Job 9 verses 32 to 33. Job is crying out for a mediator, someone who can bridge the gap between him and God. This is a foreshadowing of the ultimate mediator, Jesus Christ. Job didn't know it yet, but his cry would be answered on a cross centuries later, where Jesus would become the one who lays his hand on both God and man. Job's cries for understanding echo through chapters upon chapters. He wrestles with God's silence, pleading for answers. Job 23 verses 3 to 5 captures his desperation. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Job isn't asking for his suffering to be removed. He's asking for an audience with God. He wants to understand. He wants a reason. He wants the judge of all the earth to explain himself. And yet, for what feels like an eternity, God is silent. Have you ever felt like that? Like you're praying into a void. You cry, you worship, you ask, but heaven feels sealed. That's when doubt creeps in. Does God care? Is he even there? But Job's story shows us that even when God seems silent, he is not absent. He is listening. He is watching. He is waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. After Job's friends have exhausted their flawed wisdom, a younger man named Elihu speaks up. Elihu is angry, not just with Job's friends for their poor counsel, but with Job for justifying himself over God. Elihu doesn't offer all the answers, but he shifts the conversation from, "Why is Job suffering?" to, "Who is God in the midst of suffering?" He says, "Behold, God is exalted in his power, who is a teacher like him?" Job 36 verse 22. Elihu reminds Job, and us, that sometimes suffering isn't punishment, sometimes, it's a classroom. Pain teaches us things that comfort never could. It exposes the fragile idols we cling to. It refines our faith. It humbles our hearts. But the most important moment is still to come. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of silence, God answers Job. But he doesn't come with soft words. He comes in a whirlwind. A storm. A display of uncontrollable power. And he doesn't give Job the why he's been begging for. Instead, God asks Job a series of thunderous questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Job 38 verse 4. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? Job 38 verse 12. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the doves? Job 39 verse 1. God takes Job on a tour of creation. He shows him the vastness of the cosmos, the intricate details of wildlife, the power of nature's forces. It's overwhelming. It's majestic. And through it all, God is asking Job one thing. Do you trust me? Not because you understand, but because I am God, and I am good. God never explains to Job the reason for his suffering. He doesn't tell him about the heavenly courtroom scene. He doesn't reveal the wager with Satan. Why? Because what Job needed wasn't an explanation. He needed a revelation of who God is. Explanations satisfy the mind temporarily. But a revelation of God's sovereignty and goodness satisfies the soul eternally. Job's heart is transformed not because he got his why, but because he saw the who behind everything. When life collapses and the why is hidden, the heart finds peace not in answers, but in the presence of a God who is bigger, wiser, and infinitely more loving than we can comprehend. Faced with the immensity of God's power and wisdom, Job responds with humility and awe. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Therefore I despise myself, and repent in dust and ashes. Job 42 verses 2 and 6. But don't misunderstand Job's repentance. He's not repenting for secret sin that caused his suffering. He's repenting for assuming that God owed him an explanation. For demanding that God fit into his limited human understanding. Job's suffering didn't change his circumstances immediately. But it changed his heart. He moved from demanding answers to surrendering in worship. For young adults, this is a turning point. Our generation is hungry for meaning, for justice, for purpose. But we must learn what Job learned: God's silence is not his absence. His mystery is not his cruelty. His sovereignty is not cold indifference, it is love beyond comprehension. After Job's surrender, something remarkable happens. God turns to Job's friends and says, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Job 42 verse 7. Despite Job's raw, emotional cries, God affirms that Job's honesty was more righteous than his friend's pious but shallow theology. God commands Job to pray for his friends. And in doing so, Job becomes not just a sufferer, but an intercessor. Then, the Bible tells us, "And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job, when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before." Job 42 verse 10. Job's health, wealth, and family are restored. He receives new children, lives to see 4 generations, and dies, old and full of days. But the true restoration wasn't in his material blessings, it was in his relationship with God, now deeper, richer, forged in the furnace of suffering. Job's story points us to a greater story, the gospel. Job's cry for a mediator is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, the one who took on our suffering and became the bridge between God and man. Jesus, like Job, was innocent. Yet he suffered unjustly. He was misunderstood by his friends, abandoned, and left to die. On the cross, Jesus echoed Job's cry. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27 verse 46. But through his suffering, Jesus accomplished redemption for all of us. He became our ultimate intercessor, our mediator, our restorer. The story of Job isn't just an ancient tale, it's a shadow of the cross. And it speaks to every young adult facing trials today. Your suffering isn't pointless. It's not wasted. In the hands of God, your pain becomes the soil where deeper faith grows. What does Job's story mean for you today? If you're in a season of loss, know that God sees you. He's not absent in your ashes. If you're questioning God's goodness, Job's story gives you permission to wrestle, to lament, to be honest. If you feel misunderstood by people, remember that Job was, too. But God vindicated him. If you feel like heaven is silent, trust that the God who spoke to Job out of the whirlwind is still sovereign, still speaking, and still working behind the scenes. Job's journey was not the absence of God's love, it was the stage upon which God's greater purposes unfolded. Job's faith wasn't fragile. It was forged in fire. And that's the kind of faith God desires to build in young adults today, not a faith that crumbles when life is hard, but a faith that stands firm even when the why is unclear. The Apostle James wrote, "Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful." James 5 verse 11. Job's steadfastness is a beacon for all of us. It calls us to anchor our lives not in circumstances, but in the unchanging character of God. In the end, Job's most powerful act wasn't his endurance, it was his worship. From the moment he lost everything, Job declared, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Job 1 verse 21. This is the heartbeat of the Christian life. A faith that says, even when my world falls apart, I will bless the name of the Lord. Even when I don't understand, I will trust Him. Even when life hurts, I will worship. Young adults, God is not afraid of your questions. He's not offended by your pain. But He is calling you to lift your eyes above the suffering, to see Him, not as a distant judge, but as a present, loving Father who is working all things, even the hardest things, for your good and His glory.